We never settled on a 1,000 subscriber special, so I will do a thing that others have done. A fleet overview and update with my current train models. It would take a very long video to cover all 13 locomotives and 11 cars, so I will limit myself to engines this time, going from oldest to newest. Maybe I can cover the rolling stock in a future video, pending the level of interest. The oldest model in the fleet, the 2013 ACE 3000, didn't get a proper video until earlier this year. I have changed it a lot from the original build, and I even rebuilt it recently to match the rebrickable instructions. I still consider the never built ACE one of my favorite prototypes, and I consider the model one of my best running as well. While I still don't run it much due to its size, I don't see an update or a disassembly anytime soon. My second oldest locomotive, the 2014 PRR T1, has probably undergone even more revisions than the ACE, but not as recently. Also, still one of my favorite prototypes, the T1 also doesn't get run much due to its size, and it doesn't run quite as well as the ACE either. Having seen the performance of my short-lived 5AT, I want to try rebuilding this engine with powered drivers, even if it means giving up on R40 compatibility. Like the other two oldest models, the 2014 RF-16 has had a lot of changes, but almost exclusively to the drivetrain. Though I documented this unit with 4.5 volt motors, I replaced that setup with ungeared 9 volt motors after taking apart the U30B. I do intend to keep the RF-16 around, and for any potential cosmetic update, I would want to try to find a contemporary replacement for the windshield part and assembly. Having way more locomotives than receivers and motors, I have to store a lot of engines without electronics. This shows more for the 2015 A6b, since the receiver and battery box normally support the roof. I converted this engine back to a 9 volt drivetrain as I have more use for powered up components at this time, but I still don't run this much, hence the lack of magnets. Nonetheless, these small locos stick around since they take up little parts or space. The 2015 QJ runs a little more frequently than the last four models, and it remains more or less unchanged since its last video. While the articulated chassis has proven reliable and capable with a variety of motors, it does limit accurate modeling, and I probably would not implement it again. That being said, I will probably keep the QJ until I can find good enough drawings to try building a smaller SY or JS class. The oldest design in this lineup without any revisions, the 2017 Model 40, remains my smallest 1:48 scale power functions engine, and it will probably stay that way. I still think the model looks good and runs well, and I would like to run it more, but the fragility of the greebles and the difficulty of changing the batteries discourage me from doing so. Nonetheless, this model probably sticks around since it takes up few parts and little space. Another unmodified design, the 2019 USATC S100, has run maybe once since I filmed it for the channel. We almost exclusively use AA and AAA envelopes for all our Lego electronics, but the 4.5 volt power car requires C batteries. Plastic shims can increase the diameter of the cells to physically fit, but they can't expand the conductive area on the bottom to touch the contacts in the car. If I get around to GBC Train version 2, this might get more use. Now I start getting into more recent models. I consider the 2021 1928 D2 one of my best. It also runs reasonably well and has decent operating ergonomics, so I tend to bring it out a lot. I don't have any particular affinity for the prototype, but I do like the rarity and quirkiness of these suburban tank engines. This model hasn't really had any changes, but I do think I could replace these 1x1 clips with 1x2 clips to prevent them from rotating. The 2021 SC-44 remains my only model of a modern locomotive. I built it to use the buggy motor, but power functions does not supply enough current to drive it, so the engine does not run much. I experimented with gearing an actual train motor for more torque and less speed, but it really struggled to do better than other geared drivetrains. As far as future plans go, the Charger has a wide variety of prototypical paint schemes, and I might want to do a different one. I don't consider the 2022 1912 D2 quite as nice as the 1928 D2, mostly because the boiler has some weird construction to accommodate the drivetrain. Still, being a relatively small engine with easily accessible batteries, I do run it pretty regularly, and having to control it with the Powered Up app has not felt like a limiting factor. At some point, I would like to try to improve the boiler and cylinder construction as well. I made the 2022 PRR Doodlebug mostly to show my building process, but it has basically replaced my MP54 as my train motor powered model. I actually use Powered Up instead of power functions because installing a receiver apparently feels more troublesome than using the PU app. I also think the roof panels need some stud connections, and the front faces need a bit more reinforcement. I didn't get the 2022 UP8080 in the group shot because I forgot about it, because it sits in its own box, because of its massive size. This model hasn't left said box since it came back from Bricks by the Bay. I don't know what I want to do with such an impractical train. At the same time, I probably would not use too many of the yellow parts if I dismantled it. Perhaps I will actually look into building a much smaller DD-40AX. Finally, I skipped over the Fairbanks Morse H1044 because it has had some modifications and I want to talk about them in a separate video. That pretty much wraps up this locomotive overview and update. Please consider subscribing if you like what we do, and have a nice day.